हेलो एवरीवन, वेलकम बैक टू अ यूट्यूब चैनल। और आज का जो हम टॉपिक डिस्कस करेंगे, हम बात करेंगे जस्टिस के बारे में। सो लेट्स स्टार्ट। Before that, as we all know that this Unacademy UPSC CSE subscription is only limited for a limited period of time. So before the price really increases, then you should use this discount of 10%, and you just need to apply the simple code and you need to subscribe now. As we all know that Unacademy Aspire is providing all India free mock test series for all civil servants, services aspirants of UPSC CSE Prelims 2020 of paper 1 JS on every 10 and 25th of every month, and along with that we're also providing you with exciting prizes and scholarships also for all top 50 rank holders. And this was conducted on 10 October at 10 a.m. sharp. As we all know that we have 3 complete UPSC CSE batch preparation that was already started from 5th October 2020, and we have 3 complete batches. The first is bilingual, in which the medium of instruction would be in Hindi English both. The second is in complete Hindi, and the third is in complete English. So in whichever language you are comfortable in, you can enroll for that batch course. Now this one subscription has like unlimited benefits for every student. Like you can learn from your home, you have unlimited access to all courses, top educators on one platform, full syllabus coverage, double doubt clearing session, live test series, study material will be provided to every student in form of PDF material. Answer writing session will be taken under our guidance and mentors. And this is also like a one-stop solution for complete UPSC CSE preparation. We have structured batches with top educators, batches in Hindi, English, bilingual, late night as well as 2-year batches, 100% syllabus coverage, vast range of optional prelims, main test series, double doubt clearing session, daily current affair practice, English and essay writing practice, and we'll also provide you with the performance analysis so that you can know about your highs and lows and you can improve on your low points. And we also prepare you for the interview preparation, which is very essential for every UPSC aspirant. So if you subscribe now, you will get 10% off. You just need to apply the simple code on this get subscription over here. And we have Unacademy Champions Conclave with a power packed session with toppers of UPSC CSE 2019. This is a conclave that must be attended for every UPSC CSE aspirant, and it was succeeded in the country's most coveted exam with this free to attend conclave for every student. And this was dedicated to learn about the preparation journey of 2019 toppers and the various tricks and tips from everyone who cracked it. So this was like we had like 14 iconic toppers, 10 educators, and 14 talks and discussions. So indirectly it was very helpful for everyone. So as we all know that we are providing you with a daily current affair test series that is completely free on 7:30, 20 questions for 20 minutes, and it will consist of 40 marks along with your test analysis. So if you really like our channel, then you can join on YouTube, Telegram and Facebook, and do like and share this channel. So let's start. So before understanding what justice means, we need to actually go back to the background so that we can understand the concept of justice very easily. So as we all know, the various political thinkers with the in the earliest time were trying to formulate the concept of justice. But with the dawn of the modern consciousness, as you can see, so under the influence, we can talk about the modern democracy and socialism play a very important role in shaping the justice for everyone that is prevalent in the present day. So as we can see, the traditional view of justice was just the way of the concept of justice, and the problem of justice in contemporary period of time is concerned with all the determining the logical criteria for the allocation of goods, services, opportunities, beliefs, powers, honors, as well as the obligations in the societies. So therefore it basically refers to the scarcity of situation also. So in short, we can understand that justice is concerned with the allocation of benefits as well as burdens on the both sides. So now how the concept of justice is basically applied to in our everyday life, we can see that justice is the primarily a problem of the moral philosophy. But since it has to be implemented by a political order, it also becomes a problem for the political philosophy also, because here it is a very important to note that the quest of justice will not be just relevant in a purely authoritarian or competitive or communist regime, but in purely authoritarian system we can see that where it belongs to a traditional type or modern type. So all the allocation is basically made according to the dictates of an established authority. So therefore over here we can see that there is no new search for the new criteria of allocation. So then there is a purely competitive system that all the allocation is decided by the play of the free market forces that we are talking about in the liberal market. And therefore we can see that there was no scope for applying any of the new criteria in this. So finally, a hypothetical situation in the communist system where the rule of allocation was according to the need is supposed to be applied, and it will be futile to consider all the alternative principles of justice also. So if everybody's needs are met, then the problem of injustice would automatically disappear. So that was the ideology of the communist state over there. So now let's talk about the context. As we all know, justice is primarily a problem that is discovering the right course of action. So there are distinctions between the right and wrong, which becomes very important for us to understand. So it is sometimes confused with the distinction between good or evil that we talks about. The good basically refers to what is right and just, and the evil refers to the wrong and the unjust thing that is there in our society. So if we go on to a deeper analysis, we can also find out that there are very variables that basically represent different sets of value system. Like good is akin to useful, profitable, beneficial, and so on. And bad basically implies by harmful, damaging, disadvantages in many situations. So in any of the cases, you can see the good and the bad don't basically fall in the absolute categories. So we cannot also say something is either good or bad or nothing else. So in actual practice, we can see that maybe it might be good in some other respect and bad in others. So basically, it is partly good or partly bad. So technically, you can see the good and the bad basically constitute a continuum. So you can just underline this term. And we can also see that these could be plotted on two extreme on the scale, we can see, because it permits a free access for the one extreme to the another in any direction. So any course of action or the state of affairs may be also situated on the scale that is anywhere between the two ends, so according to our assessment or the valuation of these qualities. But the position of right and wrong is very different, because you can see over here there are very absolute categories that oppose to each other in the absolute sense. We can see that something can be either wrong or nothing else, but it is also similar to the distinction between the true and false that we can talk about. So something which can be either true or false or nothing else. In short, we can say the right and the wrong, like the true, false, are they basically a mutually exclusive categories, and their relationship is also represented like a dichotomy. So it is a peculiar dichotomy where negative would prevail over the positive, and if something is partly true, it must be false, and if something is partly false, then it must be false. So if we can see something that has been partly right, it must be wrong, and something that is partly wrong, then it must be wrong also. So in this context, we can also see that the justice basically corresponds to the right, and the injustice basically corresponds to the wrongdoing. So now let's come on to the continuum and dichotomy. So basically the term continuum stands for the logical device that basically tries to represent a range of variables which falls under two distinct opposites. And it is based on an assumption that though the two opposites are situated on two extreme positions, like the two ends of a straight line, or we can say the two ends of a ruler also, but they're also, as we know, that they're linked together to each other so that they can provide a easy access from extreme to another. So this dichotomy, on the other hand, basically means that it rules are such possibilities between two mutually conflicting positions also. So one may either be the extreme or the another, but these are like the two banks of a river which cannot be connected by a bridge or any navigation facility. Now let's talk about the utilitarianism. So basically, what is the view of Jeremy Bentham on the concept of justice? We will understand through this through his words. So basically, as we know, the school of thought was founded by Bentham, and he treats basically the pleasure and pain are the two chief motive of every human action, and the balance of pleasure over pain is also like derived from a thing or a course of action that can be also termed as a utility, which means the source of happiness for every individual. And according to his view, he basically feels that this is the guiding principle of public policy, that should be the greatest happiness of the greatest number. So basically, it is very important to note that the utilitarianism tends to subordinate the individual to the collectivity. So when J.S. Mill gives a precedence to the liberty of individual over the opinion of the majority, he basically seems to be distancing himself from the mainstream of utilitarianism, that means the thought of the Bentham. And he was coming to the idea of justice. So we can see over here, Mill basically accords that the primacy to the moral worth of a policy, that instead of subjecting it to the cost-benefit analysis, its tendency is basically to restore all the dignity of the individual on the various moral grounds that was brought in by a logical conclusion. In the Rawls theory of justice, we'll study about this in our second PowerPoint. So now justice is also like considered with a dynamic idea, because as we know, the term justice implies the quality of being just, right and reasonable. So it is supposed to be what is unjust and wrong and unreasonable. Basically, it embodies an ideal that is akin to the absolute truth, and yet it is a dynamic idea also, because our realization of that ideal and the comprehension of the absolute truth is very continuous process throughout our life. So our progress always goes in a certain direction that depends upon the development of our social consciousness also, so that it is also regarded as some centuries ago that it was not even regarded today. So we can see that the slavery and the serfdom was basically widely justified in the ancient and medieval Europe, whereas the untouchability was also justified in our country a few decades ago. The inferior status of women was also taken as a granted the world over for not so long ago. And even the racial discrimination was justified to the recently we can see in some parts of the world. So these conditions are basically now what we are talking about, the widely they are regarded as unjust. So if we look at the various changing outlook of all these problems and the changing public opinion that is there in favor of human liberty and equality, we can see ample of proof in the dynamic character of idea of justice. Now, it is very necessary for us to understand the conception of justice is always based on so-called reason, but a man develops his faculties of reasoning like according to the social consciousness of his age, as we all know. So the true meaning of justice should also be therefore determined in the light prevalent of the consciousness of a man. So what D.D. Raphael in his Problems of Political Philosophy in 1976 described this as the modern consciousness. So we don't claim that this would be the perfect idea of justice, but the social consciousness in every being is very ever growing phenomenon, and which should be prepared to accept the new and progressive ideas as far as they are supported by a proper reason. Now let's talk about the second topic in our presentation, that is the relationship between the liberty, equality and justice. As we all know, these three principles are also known as the Trinity also, because these three principles cannot live without each other and they coexist with each other very well. So if we want to provide you with the liberty, then we need to have equality and justice as well in society. So basically they are incomplete without each other. So let's talk about the relationship between these three. So as we know, the Ernest Barker in his Principle of Social and Political Theory 1951 has said that the justice basically represents a synthesis of principles of liberty, equality and fraternity. And justice is also a thread that runs through all the values and makes them parts of an integrated whole, and it reconciles its conflicts, contradictions, gives them a shape, universal principle of governance. And justice is basically an idea behind these values which uphold them in a high esteem because they're manifestations of justice. So justice over here is a final goal to which all the values should conform. In the final principle of justice, we seek to regulate all the human relations in society by the principle of liberty, but the liberty is also qualified by the principle of equality, and the equality is further qualified by the principle of fraternity. So basically, their intention is to make sure that each individual gets a fair share in the advantages that he is getting from an organized social life. So each individual gets a common civic minimum beyond like one works that has been rewarded according to the value of his contribution that has been made to the public welfare. So it must be also a stain that that an unduly large share of wealth, prestige, and power is not just cornered by only the privileged sections of society or the section by the dint of its money or manipulative power, but the principle of justice is not merely a formal liberty equality, but the transformation of the social condition which try to obstruct the enjoyment of the freedom and equality of every ordinary man and woman. Now let's talk about the dimension of justice. As we all know, the traditional concept of justice was focused on the just man only, and it was just concerned with the virtues that are benefiting a man for enhancing its moral worth, and it consisted in the performance of his duty that has been attached to his status by determined by the prevalent law of social custom and modern of thought. So we can take an example of the typical traditional approach to the problem of justice that was provided by the Plato's theory of justice, which sought to describe that everyone will perform their own duties that has been assigned to them, and they required them to develop the virtues that are benefiting those duties. So basically, Plato prescribes that if we perform our duty properly, then basically we are fulfillment of the instrumental is already building a just social order in a society. But the justice also results from each element in society, like doing its appropriate task, doing it well, doing it only. So in order to achieve a perfect harmony in the society, it also symbolizes that the justice, it is an imperative that the reason must rule within the man as well as within the state also. So in a just and ideal society, we can see the reins of government shall remain in the hands of class of philosopher kings who are supposed to be living in the environments of reason, whereas the material production, military defense, and that shall be entrusted to the producer and warrior class respectively. Now, the idea of social justice comprises of a force that behind a social chain, and it is prescribed when people find fault with the existing social order. They are involving in oppressive, exploitative social conditions that try to raise a demand for the social justice, and it tries to seek a suitable changes in the social policy for determining an authoritative allocation of value. So now the ideas of liberty and equality are derived from the substance of the idea of social justice, when this principle try to seek the transformation of the existing social condition to eliminate the injustice in society. In a nutshell, we can also see that social justice is a voice to oppressed and the underprivileged against the excesses of the social system. So it is an expression of what is due to the individual from society, especially to the individual who is condemned to a wretched subhuman living because of the defective system of distribution of disadvantages that are there from the organized social life. Now, the main problem of social justice is to decide an appropriate allocation of the advantages that are available and that can be like secured through the instrumentality of the social organization. So when a modern idea of justice is applied to the various aspects of social life, we get a legal, political, and socio-economic notion of justice. So basically, there are by no means a watertight compartments that constitute a continuum within the general scheme of social justice. Now let's talk about the legal justice over here. As we all know, the legal justice basically is applied in two contexts. One is the justice according to law, which means that we don't question the validity of a law, and but we focus on the various principles of administration of justice. that is according to the prevalent law, and second is the law according to justice. So over here we try to seek the substance of a law that itself is to ensure that it conforms to all the requirements of a justice. Like we can talk about the Alfrosh on in his on law and justice try to argue that the justice consists of efficient administration of law that should not be tested on some imaginary moral values. And even Morris on in his book on justice and society also try to elucidate that the law totally accepted what may be called the formal principle of justice on the basis of law, and the notion of legal order basically implies a decision that shall be made and not arbitrarily, but in accordance with the general rule. We can see that these general rules are whatever they are, they shall be correctly. That is what is moral. Moral is called impartially, that has been applied, and that is by criteria we are trying to define the class of cases that are coming under the rule and not affecting the subjective reactions of a particular judge. Now justice then is a conformity with the existing law because it tries to represent an outstanding example of the concept of legal justice as the justice according to law. It does not question whether a particular law itself is the right or wrong, but on a plea that is there is no scientific verification of that. So a good law is also known by its efficiency in attaining its purpose and whatever the purpose may be. In this sense, we can also see that the problem of justice has nothing to do with the purpose of law because it is solely concerned with the efficacy of law. Now justice in a totalitarian societies we can see might be distorted, or not because of bad laws but because the power that has been given to judges in disregard to the fixed rules. And this view has like represented an outstanding example in the concept of justice according to law, because it does not question whether a particular law itself is right or wrong on the plea that there is no scientific way of such verification. A good law can be also known by the efficiency of in attaining by a particular purpose for everyone. So whatever the purpose may be, in that sense he can also see that the problem of justice had nothing to do with the purpose of law. So basically it was concerned only with the efficacy of a particular law. And we can see justice in a totalitarian societies are basically distorted non basis of this, but on the other hand we can also see that the Ernest Barker in his Principles of Social and Political Theory in 1951 also dwelled on the concept that the legal justice as law according to justice. Now Barker also draws a distinction between the positive and natural law, and he tries to show that the law derives its validity and values from two different sources. Now the positive law basically denotes a particular law, the law that has been defined and declared by each community by its own members. And the other hand, we can see the natural law is actually kind of universal and a law that can be founded on what is right in itself, and which is actually just everywhere and all the time. So for all the mankind on what is valuable, whether it is valid or not. Now Barker also points out very clearly that ideally the law has ought to have the both validity and value of it. Therefore, the law is the most efficient that it conforms to the principle of justice and also the authority of state. So if you try to view the two legal justice that has been represented by Roche and Barker, we can see that justice in legal sphere consists of not only the efficient proper administration of law, but it also tries to postulate the basically law itself should be embodied with the human values that are according to the prevailing social consciousness, and if the law does not reflect the changing social values, it will turn out to be like a dead weight on the wheels of social progress and only to discard it to a violent overthrow. Now let's talk about the political justice. So basically the term political justice we see can be applied to embrace a restructuring of the entire fabric of socio-economic and political relations. Over here we can take example of of William Godwin in his essay on property in 1793. He used the term political justice to basically denote a moral principle whose object was for a general good, and especially that invoked evolve a genuine system of property. Even the author also said that in political justice, the uses of legal procedure that he has considered that political Justice as a search for an ideal for all its members will also communicate, interact with the body of politics to assume its highest perfection. So basically, we can understand by political justice basically the transformation of all the political institutions, that the institution represent and care about the interest of its people and not just only of privileged classes. So the representation of institution we're talking about is the legislation and executive that constitute of the principle on the universal adult franchise where there is independence of judiciary that is protected and maintained. So basically, this implies that the rule of law, that is the principle of the governance, should not just be arbitrary, but it should be conducted through a proper procedures that has been authorized on the legislation that should be passed in the proper form. So constitutional government is also like an essential ingredient for the social justice, in the sense that it is the second place for political justice also, that basically tries to guarantee the liberty that is of thought and expression and the right to criticize the government and any of its policy. So finally, we can see the complete freedom of forming association, interest group. Basically, it articulates the interest of the people, the normal channels of communication, and through political parties. And also, it tries to approve given. It also tries to express approval and disapproval on a particular measures also. So therefore, the political justice tries to postulate the universal availability of mechanism for resolving basically the conflicting claims of different interests of society. Now let's talk about the socio-economic justice. As we know, this term socio-economic justice has two basic elements over there: the social justice and the economic justice, and the combination can be known as socio-economic justice. So basically, this means the social life of a community cannot be transformed according to justice unless it has an economic relation that can actually transform it. So the term economic justice has been used in a very restrictive sense by reordering the human relation, like the relation of employer and worker, trader and consumer, landlord and tenant, money lender and borrower, and etc. On the other hand, we can see the term social justice is like more used more comprehensively, that includes the to restore the dignity of human beings who lost it due to the lower income, education, or cultural status. And the term socio-economic justice is basically comprehends a reallocation of all the material and moral advantages of social life, and it denotes a progressive concept and model of development. And the Indian institution we can see is basically consists of preamble, that is dealing with the directive principle of state policies that promises us a justice of social, economic, political, and social, economic, and political only. Now, the term social justice we can see was applied in all three spheres over there, and the economic justice become very crucial because the economic disparities and injustice are basically bound to erode the foundations of the legal and political justice. So we can see that the social justice in the wider sense basically means to reorder the social life and the manner of material and moral benefit that should be given to them and not just a tiny privileged classes also. And basically, the main aim is to ensure the upliftment of the lower, weaker, and underprivileged section of a society. Therefore, it involves a proper synthesis of liberty, equality, and fraternity. Like in liberty of thought and expression, formal equality, special safeguards, and right to property also. So now let's talk about the distinction between the substantive and the procedural justice. So this contemporary debate on the nature of justice basically focuses on the distinction between the two, that are also called social justice or distributive justice. Now the procedural justice basically tries to hold the necessary that determines a just procedure for allocation of social advantages like goods and services, opportunities, benefits, power, honor. Then its outcome will automatically come that will be accepted by everyone and just. And the allocation will be result in just a procedure that must be treated as just. On the contrary, we can also see that the substantive justice argues that basically the allocation of distribution of social justice among the various sections of society should be just, and that is the primary issue. That the procedure for making such allocation is basically a secondary issue which can be adjusted to the suitable requirements of the just distribution. Now, the notion of procedural justice is therefore closely related to the tradition of liberalism, According to its view, the function of justice to regulate the mutual relation between individuals group. The quest for justice should basically aim at evolving reasonable rules which should be applied impartially to all the categories. Now, the freedom of contract is actually a mainstay of procedural justice, and it requires the state to ensure that no individual group would suppress another by force or fraud. Even Norman Berry also illustrated that the procedural justice can be exemplified in competitions such as races. A fair race in which not only which the person who wins morally deserves to win, but the one that there is no cheating, include nobody jumps the gun or any has unfair advantage to the through the uses of drugs. So according to our procedural justice, I should treat the rules of market economy in the models that has been like the rules of the human behavior, and it holds the market mechanism that creates necessary condition for the most efficient use of resources. Now the exponents of procedural justice are like Herbert Spencer, Milton Friedman, Robert Nozick, and etc. And John Rawls in 1921 to 1922 has basically sought to accommodate the requirements of substantive justice and social justice through procedural justice. So over here we can see the procedural justice tries to repudiates that all the discrimination between human beings on the ground of religion, caste, tree, and it tries to accept that the equal dignity and the moral worth of all human beings should be the main idea. That is also very progressive. Even Spencer argues that the state should give support to all the incapable people who actually need the support, and the amount of dividing the capable and prudent and the stronger of the genuine share should be there. Even Friedman and C.B. Macpherson also try to give their various views on justice. So basically, in contrast, we can see the idea of substantive justice corresponds with the philosophy of socialism. It holds the test of justice in society that consists of ascertaining whether the poor or individual or underprivileged have like a particular adequate opportunity to improve a lot, and it also demands the opportunity for self-development for their progressive extended. Now let's conclude by saying that the justice is not just a problem of a moral philosophy, but it is also guide through public policy. Also, it arises two main question over here: scarcity situation where the goods and services are too scarce to satisfy all the contestant, and second, in the open society where allocation of various benefits is not just tied to a fixed status of various individuals, but they are free to the demand of fair share on the reasonable ground.